Hey everybody, Matt Colville here. We played D&D 2 weeks ago, and we're going to play again tonight live on Twitch at 7 o'clock Pacific. You can come and hang out. The chat is a lot of fun, and hopefully you'll have a lot of fun watching. This is the campaign diary, where I sort of, tell you the story of what happened last time we played, and then afterwards I talk about how I think things went. When last we left our heroes, you may remember that the players were descending into the mausoleum underneath the library on the Pellet. The Pellet is an urbanized island off the coast of Capital, still considered part. It's connected by bridges and stuff, so it's still considered part of the city proper. They've been paid to recover an official government document in the mausoleum because the mausoleum has also been used for, over 1,000 years as an official government city repository of important documents. They fought a gelatinous cube and a mimic last time, which was a lot of fun, and now they are descending one level down, and this was a very dungeon crawly episode. I just downloaded a map that I liked online, and then I populated it with encounters. The players descend to this second level, and there's a long corridor going north and south, and across the way from the stairs down that they are entering from, there is double doors and an archway held up by stylized columns, stylized to look like people. There's text that they can't really read, 3 lines of text on the wall opposite, and then there are doors north and south in this corridor, and the corridor branches as you hit the end of it, and they start exploring. Boots casts Comprehend Languages so we can read the text, which announces that this is the crypt of House Sibelius, and it says, "Bow your heads, ye who enter here. Those interred were greater than thee in life, and now more stately in death." And instantly, Leech, Matt O'Driscoll says, "Oh, I wonder if this is some, Indiana Jones stuff, where we're literally going to have to bow our heads." Spoilers, it is. King is somewhat reluctant to just go across the corridor and go through the double doors opposite. He wants to explore the other rooms that are adjacent to this corridor. And so the players enter these rooms. I describe what's in them. There's no monsters in here. The heroes see dead bodies strewn across the floor of the corridor. There's like a dozen of them. And they're like, oh, like fresh bodies? Like there was a battle down here? And I'm like, oh, no. These are ancient, desiccated bodies. There's thick dust on the floor. There are paths through the corridor worn in the dust that lead to all the different doors you guys can see, and all seem to either come from or lead to the stairs that you are descending from. And the players want to know about the tracks, and were they human tracks? Are they monster tracks? I'm like, well, it's hard to tell because all that happens is as you wear through the dust, as you disturb the dust, it's all that's left is bare stone. So all you see is bare stone. Given the presence of the dead bodies, and I think also just Lars's his awareness that we're playing D&D, there's going to be some combat and there's going to be an encounter down here. He's not super enthusiastic about crossing the corridor and going through the double doors opposite. So he wants to explore the other rooms that branch off of this long, wide corridor. There's nothing really in these rooms. I mean, I had descriptions written for this is an art room where they stored a bunch of art and there's a ton of documents in here. This is an old armory and stuff like that. So my descriptions have both what House Sibelius used these rooms for, but then also the fact that in these centuries since, they're become full of documents. And I had a whole list of all the different kinds of documents the players could find in here if they start asking, because I thought they might start trying to use some of these documents. They could forge them and do other stuff with them, but they never really asked what kinds of documents there were, so I never really had to use that list. As King is kind of coordinating the other members of the chain and having them explore the other rooms that branch off this corridor, Boots just decides to go through the big double doors opposite the stairs down. And Lars talks about how great Boots is going to get us all killed. He knows that on the other side of these doors is going to be some kind of encounter. Of course, he is correct. Nothing seems to happen. The players are all waiting to see what happens when Boots enters this big room on the other side of the double doors. And then Slim goes through, and Slim says, "I bow my head to no one." And as the players are all talking about what they're going to do next, I start saying, it's initiative.
Well, move Slim into there. Slim will go in.
Oh, sorry,
I'm in
Slim.
decent shape.
Oh, up towards this way?
Yeah, like in the room with.
Just in
Are
case.
you going to bow?
Bow your head.
No, it's initiative.
He's never.
I bow to no one.
It's initiative.
I know you don't.
It's initiative. Okay.
And the players, it takes a little while for the players to twig to the fact that a combat's going to start. Anna asks, is that because he didn't bow his head? And I said, how would your character know that? The two pillars that appear to be holding up the ceiling stylized to look like human beings animate. They are two stone golems. I think I just used regular everyday stone golem stats, figuring the players could probably take it at this level. They're pretty powerful. I originally wanted to use a caryatid column, which is a real thing from mythology that there are stats for in many earlier editions of D&D. Classic statues come alive to attack the party. I think that's probably why some of the players were suspicious, because this is a somewhat notorious classic encounter. And but there aren't any stats for caryatid columns in 5th edition. And I was like, well, what would they be? They'd probably just be stone golems. But at the same time, because the players, there are enough of them, and even though they're mostly vanilla, like Slim has the psionic crystal that gives him extra damage when he spends an action to turn on its abilities. The players are mostly vanilla, but there are so many of them, they can still dish out a ridiculous amount of damage. So it can't just be two stone golems. It's also a whole bunch of specters, I think I used. This is pretty effective. I think they're from Gale Force 9. I have the cards, the monster cards, which I quite like. And it makes it so that because one side of the card has the stats and the other just has a picture with the name under it, I can just hold it in such a way that the players can't see the name and they look at this picture. And even people like Phil that have played D&D a lot, they don't know the art for 5th edition per se. So they're like, oh, what is that? And they don't know, is it a wraith? It's pretty effective right now, especially with new players like Tom and Matt O'Driscoll, where they don't know what this thing is. So 2 stone golems and 6 specters I figured would be a pretty challenging battle. And I was right. The specters are able to drain the life of some of the characters. It takes a round, I think, before King is able to get into position, because he's in one of the rooms looking through documents, trying to figure out, are we in the right, using the kind of Dewey Decimal System they have, which direction should we be looking in? So the specters get at least one round of actions before King is able to turn them. So this is going to turn into, I think, a repeated strategy where a lot of these encounters are going to have multiple different kinds of bad guys in them, a couple of huge tanky meat shields, and then these other creatures that can really change the nature and the shape of the battle. Copper got a chance to use one of the arrows that he got from Sumat Pole. He used the excavation arrow, which I had sort of forgotten about, and he shoots it at one of the stone golems, and I had to improvise what kind of damage does this thing do against stone golems. It's designed to be shot. It's a siege weapon. Basically, it destroys a certain amount of wall, but of course, it's perfectly reasonable that it would work against a stone golem. And so I said, okay, in the moment, I looked at how many hit points stone golems had, and I also thought to myself, well, it's going to have to be a lot of damage. So I said 10d10 damage. And the players were really like, oh, 10d10, wow, that's a lot. But I was, I'd already done the math in my head. I'm like, well, that's going to be on average 55 points of damage. And one of the things I learned from playing Champions back in the day, where you would routinely be rolling 18d6 and also taking statistics and probability, is that the more dice you roll, the less likely it is you're going to get a result that is wildly off the median. So for instance, if the average is 55, but the max is 100, I knew he wasn't going to get 100. There's a regression toward the mean. And so I knew that he was going to be able to do this 55 points of damage probably a couple of times to one of these golems. And they came up with a clever method for him to recover his arrows, where Odie, Matt O'Driscoll's imp, would go invisible, grab the arrow, bring it back to Copper. So we got to use it twice. That was a lot of fun. There was a great moment where Boots, who's in the room these 2 creatures are guarding, these 2 stone golems are guarding, Boots looks through the hole that the detonation arrow put in one of the stone golems and gives Copper the thumbs up. I thought that was really neat. And then Boots tries to he succeeds in casting Hypnotic Pattern, because it was very useful against the shadows that he fought. But both the stone golems and the specters are immune to being charmed. And that's actually the result of Hypnotic Pattern. It says it charms you. And so the players, the problem is Hypnotic Pattern is anyone in the area who can see this thing has to make a saving throw. And the players, half of them failed their save, including King, including the commander of the chain, as he's trying to get into position to turn undead. And Lars thought, I think probably, somewhat maybe imagining a worst case scenario, but I don't think it was far wrong. Lars was like, you may just have killed us all, because this was a challenging encounter when all 6 of us were alive and able to do stuff. And now half of us have failed our saving throw, including me, the person who could have turned all the specters. And so we had to look up, can he just drop the spell anytime he wants? It is a concentration spell. So yeah, he can just decide, I don't want the spell to be active anymore. And it's not. So there was a moment where I was sort of delighted. I was like, is this going to be the end? Is the chain of Acheron going to die because Boots hypnotized them all? That would have been an ignominious but pretty dramatic and tale-worthy result of this encounter. Happily, Boots is able to just drop the hypnotic pattern, and the players are able to mop up this battle somewhat handily. But while the battle is happening, the players see the next encounter, which is in this room. So the specters are in the corridor. They were the dead bodies that were lying here. And the two stone golems were the caryatid column that appears to be holding up the ceiling. In the room, in the big room, there is this figure, this robed humanoid figure who's sort of sorting through all of the different scrolls. So every time there was a lull in the combat, I would describe what this figure was doing. And Boots tries to communicate to it, and it turns to Boots, and Boots can't really see this thing's face, and it just hisses at Boots with this inhuman rasp. Of course, the players all remember the librarian in Ghostbusters, and so that's what they're imagining, and that's probably pretty accurate. Boots doesn't know what this thing is, but he tries to communicate with it. It largely ignores Boots, but of course, Tom, his imagination is going. He wants to know what this thing is, and there was a moment where I thought this was going to be a bit of an inadvertent Colville screw, where the players aren't trying to stealth their way past monsters that then, once stealth fails, the monsters awaken and come attack them. This is just inadvertently linking two different encounters. That would have been catastrophic, because I think the combat was already pretty challenging with the two stone golems and 6 specters, but the archivist that is in this room is a Bodak, and Bodaks are undead harbingers of death. They radiate a death aura. They have a death gaze attack that they can use against multiple characters, and the specters drain, I think, your hit points or your strength, and Bodaks can drain your hit points. It was going to be not a good thing. So once the battle with the stone golems was over, the players decided to rest, I think, which was smart, and that meant that they were able to decouple these two encounters. They eventually go into the big room. They don't have to bow because the columns have been destroyed. The columns that guard this room have been destroyed. But once they start to interact with the Bodak, it's initiative. And I show them the picture of the Bodak, and the players don't know. The players don't actually. I think the players have fought a Bodak before, but these characters have it, and the players don't remember what it was. And this is one of those monsters that Phil, who's probably the most experienced player at the table outside me, does not remember. He's heard the word before, but he doesn't remember what they can do. Once it's initiative and the Bodak attacks, the Bodak summons a bunch of wraiths. And originally in my notes, I said there was going to be 1 Bodak and 6 wraiths. But the players were pretty beat up from the 2 stone golems and the 6 specters. And I was like, nah, I think that this could turn into catastrophic failure. And some characters, maybe the entire party, could die. There's nothing stopping them from retreating if they wanted to. But a Bodak, so I just on the fly, I said it's going to be 1 Bodak and 3 wraiths. And that was a lot more reasonable. But a Bodak has this crazy death attack that I tried to use, I think, on Boots, and Boots resisted. And in fact, I believe it's like an area effect, but either I didn't read it properly, or I don't remember which. I thought, I don't want to use this as an area effect, because if multiple characters fail, it could turn into something. Like, I actually think that we could have more abilities where everyone in an area has to save, and then the dungeon master picks one person from those who failed rather than everyone who fails. That's a difference that I don't think we see in the rules, but could make some really challenging, life-threatening, existential threat abilities still really dramatic, still affect the tide of battle, but not result in total party kill. The Bodak its attack is one of those. So I had Boots make a save, he made his save, and then a whole turn comes around, and I think it's on their turn if they can see the Bodak. So on Slim's turn, he goes, and then I have him make a save. And Slim fails his save, and Slim drops unconscious. And it was one of those, oh, holy crap. I think Phil was like, whoa, but everyone else was like, oh, what are we going to do? We don't have the kind of healing that will get him from 0 back to full. So this is going to be really challenging. That being said, just giving him any hit points, and this is what they did, they healed him a little bit, he's able to get up and use his action surge and just completely devastate the creatures around him, and then also have enough movement left over to retreat and get out of position. So that Slim's a great character. The Battlemaster is a really well-designed class, I think, and he's playing him very tactically, but also he has I don't think he had yet used the psionic gem, which does a couple different things, by the way. So far, he's only used it to amplify, which sheathes his melee weapons in psionic energy and does extra damage with each attack, but it takes an action to use. So it's a pretty big cost-benefit calculation he has to make. I don't think he was using amplify at that moment. He might have still had amplify left over from the previous battle. You have to check the tail of the tape. We had another great cutscene where after Slim drops unconscious because of the Bodak's death gaze, we cut to the librarian who they had met last week talking to another person that works at the library. And the other person's like, who were those guards? Who were those knights? And the librarian's like, oh, they're just a bunch of couriers. They're looking for some documentation down in the mausoleum. And the other person the librarian's talking to says, did you tell them about the archivist? And the librarian goes, oh! And so it's one of these, we have these comedic cuts to the librarian not really letting the Chain of Acheron know what they were in for. And Boots actually asked the archivist, this Bodak, before combat started, hey, do you know where this one document is? And the Bodak, there is some way that the librarian and people that work here can interact with this thing without causing combat. The players don't know how to do that, but the people who work here do. And the archivist kind of looks over his shoulder for a moment, and then I think at that point it was initiative. So the players have kind of a bead. They have a line, they have a course they can set. They have a vector. They can, somewhere down this vector, we don't know the distance, we only know the direction, is the document that we're looking for. And that caused them to explore the rest of the room once the Bodak and the race were dead. And they found a secret door that led to a chamber, and they were certain, oh, it's going to be in here. It's going to be in this chamber, because this is the direction the Bodak looked. But it wasn't in that chamber. Instead, they found a whole bunch of documents, and there was a secret door. On the other side of the secret door, a bunch of documents. There's no order to them. In other words, unlike the other rooms they've been to, where there's a system, and all like documents with similar serial numbers are all gathered together, here it's just a bunch of different haphazard serial numbers. There's a desk here. It's a relatively small room. It looks like some kind of secretary's room. And there's a large lockbox iron chest. It's ancient. It's rusted. The player's like, ooh, can we get into this thing? Judge uses his adamantine greatsword and snaps the lock, and they open it up, and there's a bunch of items in here and 2 notes. The players do not immediately read the notes. Screw that. What are the items? They find a large tome. They find a big sword. I think it's a greatsword. They find a gemstone, and they originally imagined it was like a large gemstone, like the psionic crystal that they already have one of. But no, it's a tiny crystal. As soon as I held up one of my clear plastic gemstone dice, they were like, oh, it's going to be some kind of ion stone thing. And also there's a pair of boots, a pair of high boots that have stylized cat's eyes on them. And as they're looking and trying to figure out, like Boots is already putting these boots on once somebody reads the note. This is an important point because I did a good job here, I think. And I think I let the players and the audience down with another note that they got later, because I read this note when King's like, or it was either King or Judge, is like, it must have been Judge, says, okay, I'm going to read this note. I just read it out loud because I wanted to role play the author of the note. And it was a lot of fun because it was a note from Sumat Pol. Sumat Pol left these items here like hundreds of years ago because he doesn't experience time in his little pocket universe. It's not technically a pocket universe, by the way. Inside his little fold in the space-time continuum, he doesn't experience time linearly the way they do. And so he drops these items here saying, we knew you guys were going to be here in this, in a couple of days, give or take a couple of centuries. So we left this here. Hey, if you want this stuff, hey, like Slim, here's a sword you asked for. Do us a favor and leave your sword in here if you want this. And the note actually says, we couldn't find the Tome of Enlightenment. Here, we gave you this Vorpal sword. It's only +1. But it's still going to chop people's heads off, which we know you like. We couldn't find a tome. Sorry, we'll keep looking. And then the next note just said, hey, we found one of those tomes. And so both items were in here. The blue ion stone that they have is one that grants magic resistance. I made it up because once it works, in other words, you're going to roll 2 dice on advantage when you're making a save against magic. And if you save, if you don't save, nothing happens. It continues to work. You get advantage on your next save against magic. But if you do save, then its energy goes away and it won't work again for another 24 hours. So that was a way for me to give Lars the reward that he wanted without completely changing the nature of the game. Basically, he's going to get magic resistance until it works, and then he has to recharge it. And then the Mooncat's boots were something that I made up. I think I got inspiration from an old item in the Encyclopedia Magica. Like I saw some cool name, and then I spun an idea of how that item would work, and then I read the description like, oh, this doesn't work that way. The thing I thought it did is a lot cooler. So the Mooncat's boots give you an extra 10 feet of movement. You ignore difficult terrain. You cannot be knocked prone. You always land on your feet, and you reduce falling damage by 30 feet. So none of this stuff I think is game changing, but it's really cool. It's flavorful, and all these little things are going to add up, and they're going to let boots be more boots. And there's actually some dialogue between the Sumat polls, which I made fun of, saying, hey, it doesn't take, like he actually writes down, hey, quit hounding me. It doesn't take 3 people to write a letter. But they have an argument about like, well, these are the boots of a famous Riojan duelist and swashbuckler called the Mooncat. That's why they're the Mooncat's boots. But how do we know that that's not Tom's character in the future? And maybe there's a temporal discontinuity, and they have a whole debate about that, which I thought was a lot of fun. Very, very indulgent of me. But I feel like when you got something cool like this is probably not the last time, because they still have some requests about information. This is probably not the last time they're going to hear from Sumat Pol, but it's getting toward the end. And it was a way for them to get their items in the middle of the dungeon, which I think they enjoyed and thought was clever, and I had fun role-playing. So now they've got these cool items, but the document they're looking for, this is the direction the Bodak looked, but the document's not here, and the players realize, well, there's a whole dungeon. So if the Bodak was looking this way, that doesn't mean it's in this corner. It could mean it's all the way around the outside, there's another room over here. So they start exploring the rest of the dungeon, which is what I wanted them to do. Following the Bodak's gaze, they explore around the outside of the big room and the other rooms that are there. And Boots opens a door, and he hears this scrabbling sound as of someone retreating very quickly. And as he shines his light in and looks around, he sees this emaciated young human figure pointing a dagger at him, saying, "Begone, foul shade, I will not join thee." The players, I think, pretty quickly realized it's the courier. This is the lost courier. There's a whole thread. I'm sorry to the folks who did all the detective work. There's a whole thread on the subreddit /r/Matt Colville about how I originally said the courier was a girl and now it's a boy. So this must not be the right one. There must be one of them's a spy or it's a plant or one of those things. And there's somebody in the comments was like, probably Matt just forgot, which is exactly the case. It wasn't something I was keeping strict track of in that sense. This is Ilario de Bernese. He's probably about 15-year-old courier that works for the Royal Heraldric Society, and he is overwhelmed that someone has come down here basically to save him, right? And he almost immediately pledges service. He's dying, starving. They heal him. They give him food. He's ravenous, and he wants to know who these folks are, which is kind of one of the first. I'm going to do this more, and you're going to see this tonight, by the way. I want to do this more where people say, "Who are you folks?" Because it gave Boots the chance to say,
"We are the Chain of Acheron,"
which I think should be a defining element of this game, is the players stating who we're badass. There's a whole bunch of stuff going on in the city, but we are also going on in the city, and we're the Chain of Acheron. That's not something you can just ignore, and that you're going to see that play out tonight, I think, in a big way. So this was an opportunity for Tom to say, "We're the Chain of Acheron. Who are you?" And he describes who he was and why he was down here. And this is a great moment. This isn't really why I put this character down here, by the way. I just thought it would be a neat dramatic moment for them to find the missing courier, because I predicted, and I was right, that they would have forgotten about this kid by now. And so just finding him was a great dramatic beat. Hey, we're making progress. We must be going in the right direction. It's that kid. It's the courier. We just saved him from death. And I love the idea of him pledging service to the Chain. You saved my life. He's a Riojan. He's going to owe these folks a life debt, at least for a little while. And the unintended side effect of this was I now had a voice in the party who's an expert on everything that's going on in Rioja. I mean, he's a kid, but he's a courier. He travels around the city. He has a courier's seal. And he was able to let the players know when they would interpret something, especially because he loves them, they saved his life. And look how awesome they have these amazing uniforms, right? They're actually dressed in the Riojan style. I forgot about that. That reminds me, I got to remember that at some point soon, they need to get their dope ass outfits, right? Because they're walking around they've got their armor and their gear on, but their clothes are Riohan from the tailor. They're just not fitted. So they're nice. They're just not nice. So this kid loves these guys. There's an alien walking around with them. There's a guy with horns. And every time the players would jump to the wrong conclusion, while he's ravenously eating the kind of beef jerky they gave him, because that's my interpretation of iron rations, he was like, that's not, you'll see. He would explain to them that their conclusions were wrong. That was incredibly useful for me. And as far as I know, the players never really distrusted him, which is great. I have, on many occasions in other groups, I've had NPCs show up who want to help. Like, I'll be your squire. I want to serve you. And the players are so suspicious that they actually never use them as a squire. They just send them off and don't want to interact with them. So it was great that they accepted this kid. They ask Ilario whether or not he knows where the document is. Of course he knows where it is. He came down here to find it, and he's like, it's in the next room. I'll show you. They go to the next room, and this is the Ghostbusters encounter. There is literally a ghost in this room. It looks more like a library, this room does, and the ghost turns to the players and goes,
where are you from originally?
It's intensely cold in here, but not because of the ghost. The players didn't know that. I expected them to come to the wrong conclusion. They did. They enter the room, and they haste Slim. I don't remember who it was that cast haste. Was it? It must have been King. King must have cast haste on Slim, and Phil doesn't know what haste does. And so he goes through, and I think he came to some wrong conclusion, which is pretty typical with haste. Haste seems to be one of the more poorly worded spells. I can draw that conclusion only because of how often I see people online correcting other people who are playing D&D about how haste works. But I tend to I tend to let the players, even when I suspect, like I know this is a problem ability or problem spell, I let the players read it first and interpret it and maybe even play wrong with it before I start interjecting, unless there's some huge problem or I'm 100% sure on something. So I let Phil play it out. I'm like, what's the worst case scenario? Phil gets an extra attack or something. That's not that big a deal. Phil hasted playing Slim was a blast because I described him as perceiving everyone else moving slowly. And he then took that and started speaking very fast and doing everything very quickly, like really role-playing the act of being hasted. He runs into the room and he attacks the ghost. And I think, if not him and the rest of the party, just how initiative works. Here's an important lesson. Make sure if your encounter is mostly this one creature, that it gets to act. It shouldn't always act first. Let one or two characters go, but then have your boss go, because the entire party getting to attack before, in this case, the ghost, which is 80% of this combat goes, the ghost would have died in one round if I hadn't given it max hit points. And I think I may even have given it more than max hit points, which was kind of annoying and not bad encounter design, but bad encounter implementation. I should have had the ghost go earlier and get to use its possess ability, which I don't think it ever really got to do, which is, that's its shtick. If it doesn't get to use its thing, then the combat is less dramatic than it would otherwise have been. So the players they're going to obliterate this ghost, but there is another element to this battle. Once the players enter this room, they start having to deal with these things coming from the ceiling that are attacking them. I think Judge hears this something, whiffs past him, and he looks up, and the cold is being emanated from a black pudding, which stretches a large black pudding, so it takes up it's a 3x3 square in the ceiling of the room, and it's attacking them. They attack it, it splits. I think King fireballs it at one point, which does, I think it has fire resistance, actually, so it's not immune to fire. And that was a very interesting combination. The ghost and the black pudding was a lot of fun. This, as a result of being hasted, but was it Slim? Does Slim have spells? I don't think he does. Maybe he was thinking about using the manifestations. That might have been it. But somebody in the party was asking about casting more than one spell per turn. And chat was like, you can't do that. You can only cast one spell per turn. But because I've read several threads about this on Reddit, I was like, you can cast as many spells per turn as your actions give you. The rule is that once you cast a spell as a bonus action, the only other spell you can cast, asterisk, is a cantrip with a casting time of one action, which is almost all of them. And the asterisk is, it's not clear to me whether or not what it means is from that point forward on your turn, you can only cast a spell that's a cantrip with a casting time of one action, or the only other spell you can have cast, and it's retroactive, within that same turn. The way I interpret it was, from this point forward on your turn, having cast a spell as a bonus action, you cannot cast another spell unless it is a cantrip with a casting time of 1 action. So if you are hasted and you've got, different actions and you can cast, I want to cast 2 fireballs. Well, if you have 2 actions, that's fine. But once you cast any spell as a bonus action, now you are entering in this other state. And there are a lot of people online who are like, I think that's a dumb rule. And what they mean by dumb is it's so mechanical and so hard to interpret in a narrative sense. I think, why is it like this, basically, is the question, that they just ignore it. But there are definitely, if you go and read online, like, what's the downside of letting people do this? Well, there are some spells, and I think they're like cleric druid spells, where if you allow people to cast more than 1 spell per action and you don't use this rule, you can get these crazy feedback loops that turn into degenerate play pretty quickly. But my players don't know about that stuff. However, I knew the rule. I said it. They were like, okay, we kept playing. And there were people in chat that were like, I looked it up and he's right, which is nice that I'm learning. I'm not dumb, not like people think I'm smart. So at that point, I believe the players had basically cleared out this dungeon. I intended it to be 5 encounters, some of which happened last week. It was a lot of fun. It felt very dungeon crawly, and I had a blast running the encounters, and the players seemed to have a lot of fun. The combat seemed to be flowing pretty well. It doesn't feel sloggy. They don't feel, at least my memory of it is, they don't feel long and boring and drawn out. I do think there's like often a round of tons of damage, nothing's happening, right? Because these creatures need to have so many hit points to survive more than 1 act. What we need is more, I think, reactions and legendary actions, things for the monsters to do when it's not their turn. That'll make it a lot more fun, especially in these scenarios where there's only 1 or 2 bad guys. The characters finally, when in the room with the ghost, they recover the document they have been looking for. And at that point, the politics switch gets flipped on. They read the document, they make sure it is the right one, and suddenly King feels a shift in the weight on his belt that's on his shoulder. He's got the diplomat's pouch that he carries with him, given to him by Sumat Pole. The diplomat's pouch is an item from Strongholds and Followers that allows you, if you have a diplomat pouch, you can write a document, or it can be any written thing, put it in the diplomat's pouch. If it has to be addressed to somebody else with a diplomat's pouch, and that person gets a copy of, is it a copy or does it actually I think it just actually teleports the letter. So you write a letter, you address it to someone that has a diplomat's pouch, you put it in the pouch, it goes point, and the person that has the other pouch goes vroom, and they get the document. King and Judge notices also a glow from the diplomat's pouch. So King opens the diplomat's pouch and there's a letter in there. It's a letter from Angel, and this is kind of, I think, where I let the players down, because only insofar as my decision where I read out loud Pumat, so I role-played Pumat Soul, but I didn't role-play Angel, and I should have. Angel's a great character. The players like him, the viewers like him, and it would have been a fun way for them to get this sense of we're interacting with Angel even though he's not here. But instead I do what I usually do, which is I say, well, it's King's information, it's Lars's information, and I gave it to Lars, and not surprisingly, suddenly this information got treated like treasure, right? A thing to be hoarded and not released in full. And so there's this whole communication going back and forth between King and Angel. And when the players ask what's going on, King doesn't just read what Angel wrote. He tries to summarize it. And it was much less dramatic. I think it was a lot more accurate. But I'm a dungeon master. It's my job to create drama. I think it would have been better if I had been role-playing Angel in that moment. The message King gets, which I had already had printed out in handwriting script from Angel, says, something big is going on. I think someone's going to try something with the library. Maybe hold off on this contract until I get more intel. Angel. King writes back and says, it's already done. We've already finished this contract, and puts that in the diplomat's pouch. There's a moment you can imagine Angel writing, and then he gets very quickly back, gets a message, and it just says, boss. Fuck. Okay. Well, shit. Angel. And Lars laughs and he's like, now what? And then there's a long period of them waiting for Angel to follow up. This is the thing I probably should have role played, and I could sense that Lars was not going to be really forthcoming with information, and he was going to create this almost like inter-party drama with what does the letter say, and then he's going to interpret it, and his interpretation might not going to be exactly accurate, and not what the other players would conclude if they read the letter, which they're going to get to do. So this is what Angel's communique says. Boss. All right, here's what's going on. You need to read fast. The Red Falcons, and the Red Falcons are the prince's guard on the island. And remember, the prince is gone. So these guys are kind of now self-autonomous. And the prince has many different, the Red Falcons are just the prince's guard on the pellet. They don't exist outside the pellet. The Red Falcons think you're making a play to take the library. They think you're in Verona's pocket, and this is Duke Marco getting the game started. And then he explains who the Red Falcons are. You may be able to talk your way out of that. You didn't bring any troops or anything. You got those courier seals. But here's where shit gets complicated. Angel says, I think House Alvaro, who these guys sort of quasi-like because House Alvaro are nobles. They've already worked for House Alvaro in the form of the Revenant that they met that sent them into the Underdark. And that faction is super anti-Ajax. He says, I think House Alvaro has someone in the Falcons, which means Alvaro knows what the Red Falcons knows. So House Alvaro thinks that the Chain of Acheron are trying to take the pellet. They're sending Duke Prospero's best knights, the Order of 12 Dragons. Those guys, you're not going to be able to talk your way past them. If they show up and there's only 6 of you, they'll invent a reason to start a fight and solve the problem. Right there. And you're only there under courier seals. It actually is illegal. You guys aren't couriers. It actually is illegal for you to be on the pellet with your weapons. Because remember, they came here using the courier seals to pretend to be knights. Last paragraph. Also, boss, that document you're looking for, I think it proves the island belongs to House Brunedetti, and the Fulcrum are prepared to produce an heir to that house who works for them. Boss, they're trying to make the pellet legally theirs. And no one, not the Red Falcons, not 12 Dragons, are going to let us deliver that document to the Fulcrum if they know what it is. And then the last thing he writes is, you may have to fight your way out. Orders, boss? And that's where we left it. I think the players played for another 30 or 45 minutes after that, talking about what are we going to do. King takes the document they have procured, the one Angel's talking about, that demonstrates that the whole pellet belongs to House Brunedetti, and he addresses it to Angel and sticks it in the pouch, the diplomat's pouch, so it's gone. So no matter what else happens, they have gotten the document they're looking for out of this situation, which also means they don't have it on them. If they're searched or frisked, they can say, hey, we don't have this, although they don't have anything else, by the way. And they immediately hit upon the idea of saying, hey, we were here to get this kid, the courier. Look how sick he is. We've got to get him off the island. There was a great moment, one of the best moments in the evening, where Lars realized what his plan was, and he goes, we're going to do Get Help, which is a reference to Thor Ragnarok, a movie we all love. And the players instantly got it. We're going to make this kid. In fact, Tom, as Copper, thought about taking off his blood pebble armor and giving it to this kid because it looks like these red welts all over him if you don't inspect it closely. So that, I think, is part of their plan right now, is they're going to try and get out of the side. They realize they can probably talk their way past Red Falcons because the Red Falcons think they're trying to take the library, which is an important asset because of all the civic documents in it. But they're not. They're not trying to do that, and the Red Falcons sound reasonable. The only trick is what happens when 12 Dragons shows up, and I know the answer to that. And it may be the only thing that happens tonight. This is another one of those scenarios where I may only have 90 minutes of content ready before everything hits the fan. And it'll be very interesting to see how that all plays out, because I think it's going to be one of the more dramatic moments in the campaign and really, really cool for the Chain of Acheron. The only problem I have is, I'm going to tell you folks this now, spoilers, is that if 12 Dragons shows up, these guys are like, I don't know, they might be 15th level knights. And there's a bunch of them. And I'm pretty sure I can get them to goad Slim. Remember Slim? I bow my head to no one. Goad him into conflict with them. And if that happens, Slim's going to die. Like, these knights are just going to cut him down. These guys are everything everyone hates about knights. They are power mad. They outrank the prince's troops. The Red Falcons have no boss anymore. So these guys are they're what they say goes, and that's what this kid has said. The players. That's what Ilario said when the players like, well, we could say this and we could say that. We could put all our weapons in our bag of holding, and that way we don't have any weapons. We're not breaking the law. And Ilario goes, that won't work. He speaks up. He goes, that won't work. And they'll just kill you and plant weapons on you. And the players are like, oh, now we're starting to understand what's going on. We're going to have the Chain of Acheron, the Prince's troops, the Red Falcons, and House Alvaro's best knights, the 12 Dragons, on this island in conflict together. There's no way, I don't think, this situation ends without the pellet changing hands one way or the other. The only question is, whose hands does it change into? Because don't forget, the Citadel, which is another important asset, one of those little dots, one of those little power centers, resource centers on the map of the Citadel is about to change hands, and players don't know it. Essentially, at the end of the next session, or the next chunk of content, whether or not we resolve it the next session, the map of capital is going to change one way or the other. And I've been talking to the players to figure out, like, what are they going to do? And I think Schmuck has hit upon a plan, if he remembers it, because this was at dinner like a week ago, if he remembers that plan, that might work. We'll see. I'm not going to spoil it for you. The players thought about, is there a way out of here? Is there a way out of this? And so I impressed them with two things. First of all, one, there was a secret way out of this dungeon, but I took it away because I thought, that letting them run from this conflict is going to be undramatic. So no, there's not a secret way out. But I also did impress upon them that it would take months to explore the entire mausoleum. It's massive. So they've got a huge dungeon underneath them that they can explore basically anytime they want. I don't know what their motivation to do so would be, but it would be very interesting. And that's where we left things. I was pretty happy with the battle. Again, with the combats that went by. I thought it was pretty watchable. It was fun. The players seemed to have fun. I'm always worried about, like, more undead, especially with King's ability to turn undead. But it didn't turn into plenty of drama happened. There was plenty of action, and there were one or two moments where I thought, oh, I should have known better. Like, I shouldn't have had this ghost go so late in the initiative order, regardless of what I rolled. Don't just always have the bad guys go first. Let one or two players, or even three players, go. But Slim does so much damage, and the players do so much damage. When there's only one bad guy, that either it or the black pudding needed to do something to make stuff interesting. So that's a lesson learned. And I hope you folks tune in tonight, because I think tonight is really going to be where the great game gets started. So I hope that this was in some way useful or entertaining. Otherwise, I will see you folks tonight in just, like 7 hours or wherever. I don't know when we're going to make this live, probably 8 in the morning. So in about 11 hours from when this video goes live, we're going to start playing. And I once again, I have no idea how. There have been many sessions so far in this game where I was like, I don't know how they could burst through all this content in 90 minutes. And then what are we going to do? That hasn't happened yet, but it's going to happen sooner or later, maybe tonight. So I got to get ready for tomorrow. Until next time, peace out.